Hello, and welcome to the first lecture of our semester. What is history, and what do historians do? Now, a lot of us have an understanding of history that probably comes to them from high school. Some of you have probably taken at least one high school class, possibly two. I don't know what's required in North Carolina anymore. And some of you are probably from different states and have different requirements. There are those out there in this course, certainly, that have probably read lots of books, probably have visited a lot of historic sites, like maybe old houses or battlefields, or maybe have gone to very large institutional museums like the Smithsonian in Washington or the Guggenheim in New York City. But for the most part, a lot of us have this idea of history that comes to us from high school. Mainly, it's just the things that happen, and that's it. A lot of people don't know what history really is, and a lot of people don't know what historians do. And so, what I'm trying to do in this introduction is one, I want to give you some time to settle into the course and get used to Canvas. So, this is kind of an easy week. But also, I want to plant the seeds of this concept in your mind so that as we move forward and we begin to watch these videos I have, the lecture videos and the videos of little documentaries and things I found on YouTube, and when we read primary sources, things written by the people of the time, that we can have an understanding of what history is. It is my hope that all of you in this class become historians. Now, what do I mean by that? You will not probably become historians like me. Some of you will, but most of you will not. But for the duration of this class, every single one of you is going to be a historian. You are going to look at evidence and you are going to interpret it. You are going to learn about history, but you're also going to create history. History is something that we do, not simply what we learn. And as we move forward throughout this course, we will be exposed to more and more history, and through discussion boards and through your PSA assignments, and eventually through your final project, you will learn about it and you will also do it as well. So let's cover this topic. What is history and what do historians do? This is a statue from ancient Greece called Janus, or Janus, as some prefer, Janus. It's a two-headed figure facing in opposite directions. This is actually a statue of two different historians from ancient Greece. I forget which one's which, but I believe the man on the left is a man by the name of Herodotus, and the man on the right is a man named Thucydides. Thucydides was a Greek general who died in the Peloponnesian War, but before his death, he wrote a short history on the war, the history of the Peloponnesian War. The man on the left, Herodotus, was known kind of as the first historian. He was more of a travel writer, kind of wandered around the Mediterranean, going to different places and writing about different cultures and different customs and stuff that he just picked up from people he ran into. If any of you are familiar with the movie 300, came out a number of years ago, it was very popular. Not a historical movie by any stretch, though. If any of you are familiar with the movie 300, the main focus of the movie is the Battle of Thermopylae, where about 1,500 Greeks, Spartan warriors mainly, faced off against a Persian army of over 300,000. That comes to us from Herodotus. But it's a fitting statue because I like to have a picture here. And also, it shows that these are two different men with two different gazes on the world, giving us two different perspectives. And keep that little symbolism in your mind as we move forward throughout this lecture and throughout the rest of the class. I'm also using this lecture to give you kind of a prototype of what all of the lectures will look like in this course. They will all feature a lecture outline. So I'll give like a little intro speech and there'll be a picture, then there'll be a lecture outline. It will feature, as best as I can give you, a breakdown of what the lecture will be, some terms that you should write down and understand what they mean, and usually one or two, no more than three big questions that will that you should keep in mind as we move throughout this lecture. Also, these big questions sometimes will connect or verbatim be the discussion board for the week. So it's always good to keep that in mind. I want to pause just for one moment and take us back to our modules, to our units. And I understand that you can't see all of these yet the way I have them here, but you remember I said in the last video that some of these units are much longer than others. For example, this one, The Rise of an Industrial Society, is somewhat long. Then you have The Era of Western Dominance, Part 1 and Part 2, which are not particularly long. And then I have The First World War, which is very, very long. I pointed out that a lot of these videos are very short, between 7 to 15 minutes in length. In lecture or in for the lectures in weeks like this where there's so many videos on these topics that I don't want to overwhelm you, my lectures will be about 30 minutes, no more. Typically there will be exceptions, but generally no more. For the shorter weeks, my lectures might be longer. They might be 45 minutes, but I will not go over an hour. I'm trying to police myself in that regard. So the longest lecture video you'll get is an hour, plus whatever videos you have to watch. And the shorter ones will be about 30 minutes plus whatever videos you have to watch. It's the best I can do. But I just want to point out to you that I don't want to slow down the pace of this course, but I do have to put a lecture together. My shorter lectures will typically discuss what each of the videos will discuss and tie everything together so you understand why I set it up there, provide some structure so you can get what the whole unit is about. And the longer lectures are there because I don't have enough material to cover everything, and so you'll just get an entire lecture hour's worth about that topic. Just wanted to hammer that home. Forgot to mention it in the previous video. So let's return to our topic, history. What is it, and what do historians do? Okay, so let's ask a question. So what is history? That's an important question. That's the first question. What is history? Before we get to what historians do. What is history? So let me ask you, is history maps and artifacts like statues or ancient guns or ancient texts? Is that history? Is history great battles like the Civil War or the Revolutionary War, World War I or World War II? Is that history? Is history simply what we learn to answer tests, specific facts, specific dates, specific figures? Is that history? The answer to this question is not really. It is, but it isn't. It's not history, but it's not history either. It's a very important component of history. So history is not great battles. Let me get my little pen out here. History is not great battles, not people, not artifacts, and not names and dates. But these things are part of history. They are a very important part of history, but they are not all of what history actually is. The gentleman pictured over here on this side of the screen is John Fea, and you have two videos to watch of his today. John Fea is going to walk you through the specifics of history, and he will also talk about how historians think. And these are very important concepts. So right now, what I want you to do is I want you to stop this video. I want you to watch those two videos by John Fea, and then I want you to come back to this one. Do that now, please. Now that you've watched the videos by John Fea, you have a better understanding of what history is and, to a certain extent, what historians do. So, to return to our question of what history is, first and foremost, history is an interpretation of the past based on historical evidence. Those things that I mentioned before, maps, guns, wars, people, dates, all of that stuff, that is the past. The past is the raw material of history. And what historians do like a carpenter who takes nails and wood and blueprints. What historians do is they collect all of that stuff and they put it together and they lay it out and they try to understand what's going on and they write about it and they make an argument to try and answer specific questions. So history is always interpretive. It's never not interpretive. There is no such thing as a history that only gives you just the facts. Be very, very wary of people who say that so and so or this thing that you read is just the facts. Facts might be there, but there is always an interpretation. There's actually one exception to that, but there always is an interpretation. The one exception would be like an encyclopedia, like the Encyclopedia Britannica, which literally just lists facts. But other than that, all history has an interpretation to it. Some interpretations are very poor, like simply opinion based with no factual support whatsoever. Other interpretations are much better, and we will call those not opinions, but we will call those arguments. So we have interpretive arguments about what history is. So write these down. These are very important. I want you to keep these with you at all times throughout the course. The past. The past are the names, the dates, the events, the people, all of that stuff. They are the raw material of history. So not one of these things in itself is history. They are the past. That is what the past is. Remember what Fia said. This is the past. History is the interpretation of the past based on historic evidence, usually trying to answer some kind of why question. Why did this event happen? What is its significance? Historians are interested in the why. And the last word that we should be aware of is revisionism. Revisionism is a word, as Fia pointed out, that has a bad kind of boogeyman feel to it. Oh, you're just a revisionist. It's almost like they're trying to call you a liar or a falsifier. But all historians are revisionists. You can't look at the past and then make an interpretation of the past without having some kind of revision, because you're trying to bring something new to the table. So everyone does revision, whether you are a professional historian, an amateur historian, a conservative historian, a liberal historian. Everyone practices some kind of revisionism. And so what we do is we look at these topics, we keep looking at the same things in the past, unless we find new evidence, and we just add that to the past. And we keep looking at it over and over again, and we make new interpretations to try to give another fresh perspective to what history is. So what do? We look at documents. Historians primarily use analysis as their way of understanding the past. So we look at everything from documents like ledgers, photographs are historical documents, newspaper accounts. We have oral histories like what we see here. All of these are considered primary sources given to us by historical figures, historical actors of the time that we use to make a historical argument, make a historical interpretation, and try to learn something new about the past. As I said before, all historians are revisionists, and all historians practiced revisionist history. History is always revision. It cannot be avoided. Remember what John Fia had said, that without revision, so many things that we learn about in history, things that you just know even from your high school classes, would not have been learned. So if you were to go back, say, 80 years, and you took a history class in 1930, a lot of what you would get would be great men type of history, political leaders, generals. It was the 1930s, so maybe union organizers, things like that, labor history. So you'd get mostly great men history, you would get economic history, and you would get history of maybe labor struggle, because that was popular in the 30s. But you wouldn't get a lot of African American history, and you wouldn't get a lot of religious history, and you wouldn't get a lot of Hispanic history or women's history. All of that had to come about over time from historians gathering together, looking at stuff, looking at new evidence, and creating new interpretations. So now there is a thriving African American history. There is Hispanic American history. There is history of the church, history of religion, history of art, history of science, history of in the environment. So many different things have come because of revision. So just keep that in mind. History is always changing. It's always dynamic. It's always fluid. It's always moving. The past generally stays static. Unless we learn a new name, a new date, a new event, a new person, a new type of person, something that we actually never knew before, the past for the most part stays identical. Declaration of Independence was signed in 1776. That is a fact from the past. Why it was signed in 1776 is really up to interpretation. And that's where we have history, which gathers all of these things and turns it into this stuff down here. Now, John Fea has already talked about it, but I want you to read the article on the 5 C's of history and just consider what Fea had to say. And if you need to, do review his video. I think his videos are excellent. John Fea is one of my favorite historians, and his videos are very fun and easy to follow. So think of those ideas that historians, now what do historians do? Historians look at the past, they gather the evidence of the past, the raw material of the past, and they put it together and they create historical interpretations, historical arguments, and they revise things too. And how do historians think when they think about the past? We have change over time. All things change. The way things are today is not the way things were 20 years ago. The way we communicated on the internet 20 years ago is not the way we do it today. Everything changes over time. Nothing is static. Context explains why things happen and why things make sense. If I show you a picture of somebody giving somebody the middle finger, how about that? It looks like if I show you a picture of somebody giving you the middle finger, it looks like somebody is giving you the middle finger. But if I showed you maybe a few more frames of the picture, maybe you'll see that he's just flexing his fingers and he's not actually doing that at all. That extra information gives us context to what's going on. Causality. What causes events to happen? What triggers them? Contingency, understanding that when one event happens, it triggers a series of other events and other possibilities. So when the Archduke Franz Ferdinand, when he was assassinated in 1914, it launched a series of events that led us right into World War I, and we'll talk about that. And complexity, as Dr. Fea said, everything in history is complex. And that the people in that time were complex. They were not heroes and villains. They were not Christians and atheists. They were not communists and capitalists. They were not white and black. They may have been all of those things, but they were a lot more than that as well. You are a complex person. I am a complex person. And so we need to respect that people of that time were just as complicated and neurotic as we are today. Now, why am I taking us through this? Well, I already told you partially why. I wanted to fix some maybe misconceptions that you might have of what history is, what we do here, and what we're going to do in this class. We're going to look at evidence. We're going to read it. We're going to analyze it. We're going to have a little fun, I hope. We're going to definitely learn content, but we're not just going to memorize dates and names and battles. We're not going to do any of that crap. Instead, we are going to learn about history, and hopefully you will take something from what you learn and use it in the real world, knowledge-wise, like stuff about World War I and shell shock and trench warfare. Hopefully it'll be interesting to you. But we are going to learn analytical skills. And that, I hope, you will take into the real world, and that you'll look at newspapers and you'll look at history and you'll think about it and you'll analyze it and you'll compare and you'll contrast. And when somebody comes up to you and says, that's not the way it really happened, that's not the way it really works, that's not, quote, the truth, that you don't doubt them completely, but that you have a certain degree of skepticism and you will use your intellectual, historically trained eye to sift through the information and come to the conclusion yourself. This is a process, and we're constantly learning and improving this process, and I am no different than you. And as I said before, in this class, you will be, every time you log into Canvas, you will be a historian. Now, I'm a historian, but I'm also a student. So I am still a student, and you are students and historians. We are both students and we are both historians. And that's the way we will be in this class. We will help each other. We will become historians. We'll become better, and we will go on this journey together. The other reason why I wanted to introduce you to this, and then we'll conclude the class with it, is because whether or not you are a chemistry major, a nursing major, a physics major, a computer major, whether or not you are an entrepreneur or a business major, or somebody who majors in economics, regardless of what your life plans and life goals are, you have the opportunity here to learn a little bit about the world, to learn tangible skills, and you will learn that history is not merely learned and told to you, it is something that you do every single day. Whether you read or watch something, you analyze, you synthesize, and you interpret. That is what history is. So do not be complacent in this course. You will learn history, but you are also going to do it as well. It is not merely acted on you, you act on it. It is very much an interactive experience. So with that, I hope you enjoyed this first lecture, and we will dive into the actual material next week with our discussion on, what is it? I believe it is industrialism. Yes, the rise of an industrial society in the West. Until then, have a good rest of the week.